Magnificent 7, Magnificent 8, Magnificent too late? We're going to discuss on Locked On Wolfpack.
You are Locked On Wolfpack, your daily podcast on the NC State Wolfpack, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Wolfpack Nation, thank you all for tuning in for another episode of Locked On Wolfpack. As always, I'm Grayson Boone. Joining me is Kenton Gibbs, and today's episode is brought to you by Birddogs. Go right now to birddogs.com/lockedoncollege, and when you enter the promo code in all caps, Locked On College, they'll throw in a free custom Birddogs Yeti-style tumbler with every order. Kenton, how are we doing today?
Oh, I'm great. I'm ready to get into this Great 8 or Magnificent 7 or whatever we're calling them these days. I'm ready to get into it.
I mean, no different than any other sports news these days. Things are moving at a breakneck pace. So as much as we had to talk about the possibility of the grant of rights being dissolved yesterday with a potential 8th team, it sounds like that could be on the way. But news that came out today on Tuesday is that Florida State, who kind of brought to the forefront the topic of, uneven revenue sharing, their AD came out in an interview, well, not interview, but a sound clip today, kind of inferring that things had been smoothed over after, further discussions had gone down in Amelia Island at the ACC meetings. So just as quickly as maybe we had a Magnificent 7 holding the ACC's feet to the fire, maybe they have managed to put a Band-Aid on a bullet hole, you could say. Also, I did hear rumblings at the same time that Louisville could be jumping into the mix. That would bring the Magnificent 7, then I guess if you want to call them Magnificent 8, that would bring them up to 8 teams that would then allow them to begin to dissolve the ACC, like we mentioned yesterday. I also saw Notre Dame mentioned, which I think is ridiculous because Notre Dame, believe it or not, does have full voting rights in the ACC, which is,
Soft.
Again,
soft by the ACC.
Yeah, get a spine and pick a conference already, Notre Dame. But yeah, a lot to talk about, but with this new information coming out, Kenton, where do you stand now on this whole saga?
First of all, to start off with Notre Dame, I mean, this is, why buy the cow when you get the milk for free personified? They get full voting rights. They get the same rights as everybody else, and they don't have to give the biggest sport. They don't have to share any of that money in. Duh, they're not going to do that. But moving forward, I think that their lawyers have made some calls and said, hey, buddy, we've got no leverage. We've got no leverage here. You can dig your heels in all you want. You're digging your heels in the quicksand. This is not going to end the way we want it to. So let's go ahead and buddy up and do what we need to do. In the words of the Twitterverse, you signed a 360 deal, right? Like, for those of you who don't know what that means, that's when the artist signs a deal with the label where whatever money the artist gets from their music, notoriety, popularity, a piece of it goes to the label, even if the label had nothing to do with it, which is why 360 deals are frowned upon so heavily. This is the same type of deal. This is the same type of thing. These teams can feel the way they want to feel. Florida State is one of the few big dogs that would have the financing and have the viewership and the brand per se, in terms of how much of their stuff is bought, how many eyes they get on TV and all that to push for this move. And they're backing out of it. I think that this game of the world's worst game of chicken is over because there's somebody with a Mack truck and there's somebody standing there with a skateboard and gumption. Who do you think is going to win? Who do you think is going to get out the way first?
I mean, I do think possibly the game of chicken has subsided, but I do not think it's over. I think even these reports, and I'll bring up another one here from Brett McMurphy that says Florida State AD Michael Alford said ACC discussing several revenue distribution options, but admitted that they won't get close to SEC or Big Ten numbers. And then, quote, "We're never going to cover the entire gap, but it will allow you to be competitive," unquote. That tells me that, again, this just feels like a Band-Aid on a bullet hole. I think you can prolong this process and trying to renegotiate terms with the ACC and getting all these teams more money, trying to keep everyone happy. I mean, it's inevitable. I think conference realignment is inevitable. I think that is where it's going to go, regardless of how many times you try and renegotiate with who you have here already in the ACC. We mentioned yesterday that I guess this deal, the grant of rights, runs to 2036. I believe, if I'm not mistaken, the current deals that the Big Ten and the SEC have respectively end like 2030 and maybe 2032, both of them before the ACC's is up. So I think you're just kind of getting into a rinse, wash, repeat cycle, because these other schools and bigger conferences are going to continue to make more money. And while we try and patch up what we have here, it's 2023 now. 5 years down the road, it feels like we're just going to do this again. So I think it's inevitable. I think it's coming regardless. And I think this is something that we're going to have to prepare for one way or another, whether it is, complete conference realignment, or, we add teams to the ACC and make this a bigger thing than what we have now.
Right.
There's a lot of different angles that you can take of kind of what's going on here, but I don't know. I still think it's a lot of smoke and maybe some mirrors.
Again, I'm a big believer, and y'all know I talk a lot of social media talk. Well, let me tell you something. These teams are going where the money reside, where the money reside, where the money reside, folks. That is where that's what this is all about. If you think it's about something else, that's what you're missing. And here's why I say that's important to the particular conversation we're having, Grayson. These teams can want realignment all they want. Again, what is your leverage? Because let's think about this from a critical standpoint here. Okay, so if Florida State were to say, hey, we need to leave, if NC State, let's just talk about the Pac, were to say we need to leave, that's $120 million, number one. And number two, that $120 million doesn't buy you out outright. You will still be in a deal with ESPN. And I don't know if y'all know this. ESPN is not the big company. They're the baby company with the parent company. Their parent company is Disney, that is currently suing an entire state. I don't know how else to say this. If you follow the money, it will always tell you what is most logical and what makes the most sense. Yes, there is a chasm between what we are getting paid and what the Big Ten and SEC is getting paid. I understand that. Are we deserving of that chasm? No. NC State is, again, the third most watched football team in the ACC. We don't deserve to have that big of a chasm. Not at all. But with that being said, we must also pay attention to the reality of we are signed into a bad deal and we have to grin and bear it through this thing. Now, when it ends, like you said, the Big Ten and the SEC will be up in their contract, and so they'll have re-upped already. By the time ours ends, or if we find a loophole out of this, again, you're going to have to pay some money, and you're going to have to pay on top of that to get out early. But if we find a way, or if we wait until the end, we can then see, okay, this is what the market dictates. This is what we're going to go get at the end of it. I'm not saying that it's a smart idea. I'm not saying that waiting and not doing anything is great and leaving everything as it is, where it's all everybody shares evenly, even the teams that only have, 200,000 people watching every game. But I'm saying that it objectively speaking, dissolution does what?
Oh, you're asking me?
Oh, no. I'm legitimately saying, like, from a standpoint of what I'm looking at, dissolution does what? If you dissolve the conference, okay, great. Now the ACC doesn't exist, but you're still under the same deal. You're still under the same deal. You just don't have the umbrella organization to distribute out the money from the back end of it. So now what?
Remains to be seen.
I'm sitting here and I'm thinking to myself, this is a situation where, again, you're playing chicken with a Mack truck, and all you've got is your two Jordans on your feet and a lot of heart. And it's great in theory. We love to chant Rudy, but the reality is, and I hate to use a Notre Dame reference because, again, ACC grow a spine and make them commit to you, make them give you the ring if they're going to keep doing all these shenanigans. But we could chant Rudy all we want. Rudy wasn't the starting quarterback in the national championship. He wasn't the starting defensive end in the national championship. He wasn't none of those things to a team that meant a lot for a reason.
I think you might have a certain mouse that goes by the name of Mickey driving that Mack truck. And in all my life experiences, Mickey don't often lose when he goes to battle. But more on this in just a second after a quick word from our sponsor today in Birddogs. Kent and I believe both of us will be receiving our shipment from Birddogs tomorrow, which we're super excited about. I've heard absolutely nothing but raving reviews about Birddogs, and every person I've heard from always goes to their fit, their comfort, and their versatility. So this is something that if you're hearing it now from us, be ahead of the curve and get you some Birddogs as well. They make the most comfortable pants, the most comfortable shorts, and you need you a pair as well. So remember, go to birddogs.com/lockedoncollege, and when you enter promo code in all caps, Locked On College, they'll throw in a free custom Birddogs Yeti-style tumbler with every order. So, in talking about, what is and what could be, I had to take advantage of the opportunity to kind of play the hypotheticals here. And in reading up on the possibilities of NC State being in another conference other than the ACC, which is truly kind of hard to picture, I kept coming across certain maps, putting us in different conferences, what that would look like, I guess just geographically, but then you can allow yourself to run with how you think it would play out and different sports, advantages you'd have, so on and so forth. I do want to make mention of the Big Ten, and I don't believe this is unless the Big Ten were to change their academic standards. The Big Ten only allows admittance to schools that are accredited by the AAU, if I'm not mistaken.
Right.
NC State is not accredited by the AAU. So, for all intents and purposes, now you can rule out NC State potentially moving to the Big Ten. Of course, this is just now. Down the road could be a different story. So, what does this mean? I believe this means our only two main options, if it does come to conference realignment, are either the Big 12 or the SEC. So, like I mentioned, I stumbled across a couple maps. For those of you listening to this, I'm going to describe these maps so you don't feel left out, of course. But this first map, this is the current lay of the land for the Big 12. Of course, this is what it's going to look like starting in 2023. So you'll see the additions of BYU, Cincinnati, UCF, and Houston. They are new to the Big 12 party. And obviously, after 2023, or no, when does Texas and Oklahoma jump? Is it 2024, 2025?
I believe it's 2024 or 2025, one of those two.
Okay, so obviously Texas and Oklahoma will be soon out the door on their way to what they perceive to be greener pastures in the SEC. So this map I located from a Texas Tech podcast called Gambling Gauchos. Mm-hmm. They, fire name, might I add, they have located what they think it's going to look like if they bring in some ACC teams, they bring in some Pac-12 teams, and they make a super 20-team conference for the Big 12. And, of course, these new Pac-12 teams consist of Arizona, Arizona State, Utah, and Colorado. The new ACC teams coming in would be Louisville, Pitt, Virginia Tech, and NC State. And then, of course, the remaining Big 12 teams would be UCF, Houston, Baylor, Texas Tech, TCU, Oklahoma State, Kansas, and Iowa State. So, Kenton, what are your thoughts about potentially joining the Big 12? Do you think NC State would thrive in the Big 12 potentially down the road.
First thing first, the farmer jokes would finally stop. Thank the Lord.
Would they?
Oh, absolutely. The Big 12, some of these
I'm
schools,
not so sure because you'd be joining a conference of Midwestern boys.
Manhattan, Kansas has precious little. The little apple has very little outside of farming. So I would hope and pray that they weren't the ones making those jokes. But no, in all seriousness, this is one of those situations where I could see it. I could see all of these situations are fairly feasible to me. I think that the Big 12 would make a lot of sense and look good. The only problem is the Big 12 is one of the conferences that's behind even where the ACC is right now, and adding in a bunch of teams who, with all due respect, I don't see a single team on here. Let me make sure I'm correct in saying this. Yeah, I don't see a single team on here who was above NC State in terms of viewership per game last year. So I don't think that this would be that advantageous for NC State. I think we'd be one of those boats that's raising the tide for all ships here.
Yeah, if I read correctly, I believe NC State joining the Big 12 would basically be a lateral, if not a step backward in the revenue department,
right,
for the athletic program. So, I mean, that is what it is. I think eventually this could open many more doors with all these teams. You know, a 20-team conference, a super conference, if you will, would, I think, in part eventually, you could restructure an ESPN deal with a conference this big where this could be the new marquee conference to partner with ESPN. You just don't know. But I think NC State landing in the Big 12 is certainly interesting. I think, in my own personal opinion, I think it is the better of the two options. Now, I say this from, I guess, a competition standpoint, and we'll talk about the SEC here in just a second, but I'm looking at all these other schools and I'm visualizing our football program and I'm looking around, I'm saying, okay, I think we can play with any of these guys. I mean, we saw Texas Tech last year, who is typically a pretty solid Big 12 football program. We handle business. You know, of course, they still have the teams like Oklahoma State, a Baylor. Houston's been pretty good. TCU was just in the national championship. There's still a lot of exciting matchups. And then, of course, you look at basketball as well. Kansas, a blue blood. Another blue blood would be in your conference here. Arizona has been a great basketball school. You have other teams like Houston. They were a great basketball school. Baylor won a national championship just a couple of years back. So the competition levels in the Big 12 are pretty enticing for a school like NC State. You get into, women's basketball. I think NC State would super thrive in the Big 12.
And I think that's a little bit of the problem. Right? Like and maybe it's just me. I've never been the type of guy who wants to be the big fish in the small pond. I want to go where the sharks are rolling. And you know what? There's I believe I could be incorrect here. Marine biologists, correct me if I'm wrong, but sharks can grow as large as their environment. So like if you keep them in a tank. In a tank that's much too small for them, they won't grow to their full size and potential. And I don't think that NC State needs to swim with the guppies per se in some of these schools. And this is no disrespect to these schools, but with all due respect, I don't really want to see NC State playing up against some of these teams and wiping the floor with them for like, we finally won a conference championship. Yeah, but it was against the the worst of the Power 5, or then I guess it would be the Power 3 conferences.
Well, I'll say this, though. In the Big 12, there's no, I guess, reliable metric for this, but I think the average team in the Big 12, I think you could say they're a little bit more, I don't know how to say this with all the different sports, but there's more depth there. Because you look at a school, I'll just pick and choose and say like an Oklahoma State. Mm-hmm. And then you look at the ACC now and you have a school like a Boston College, with all due respect. I think, if you look at the Big 12 here, like where do you see a Boston College type? Maybe like an Iowa State, but Iowa State has had more success in a lot of different things than Boston College has. And I know I'm nitpicking here, but I don't know. I think I wouldn't necessarily say that NC State would be swimming with smaller fish. I think it it'd almost be maybe a little bit of a lateral move, but I think in different sports, you would be leveling up in some senses, and if in some aspects of competition there. But I don't know. I think it's enticing to me. I believe. I think NC State they would still have their work cut out for them in all the sports. Still, I mean, you're not going to walk into the Big 12 and they're going to hand you a trophy that,
of course, not.
Desperately desire. But yeah, I think there's a lot to like potentially about the Big 12. But yeah, so before we talk about the SEC, before we go to ad break, just real quick, a quick little fun thing. Pick one school that you would like to be a rival with in the Big 12 and why.
This is interesting. I would probably say I would love to be rivals with I want to say, part of me really wants to say Iowa State. Part of me really, really wants to say Iowa State because Iowa and Iowa State have a similar dynamic to what us and UNC have. And there's like a lot of resentment there, and there's a lot of hate there. And like to be like, oh yeah, like these guys are like us, but we're the better version of us. And to see that thing play out would be kind of nice. And plus, most of the other schools, I don't think we have that much to where it makes sense, right? Like, the annual Malik Dunlap Bowl, like that sounds kind of lame. That like you really don't want to, have beef with Texas Tech. So I think that Iowa State would be the school that I'd want.
I think a lot of people are worried about the ACC dissolving in a sense that rivalries are kind of bred through regional, similarities. So my answer for this is going to be West Virginia. And I think because they are somewhat close in proximity, you would still keep that regional sense of a rivalry. But I always sort of equate West Virginia to ECU, and we have our own sort of little brother situation with ECU. And I think that the relationship between NC State and ECU and NC State and West Virginia would kind of mirror each other. So I think West Virginia would be a potential fun rivalry to build there. But next, we're going to talk about the SEC and its possibilities after a quick word from our sponsors. So now moving forward into hypothetically jumping into the SEC. So here's a map of, I guess you could say, the current SEC. Now this is including Texas and Oklahoma here in 2024, I believe it is. But of course, in the SEC, you have Texas A&M, LSU, Mississippi State, Ole Miss, Arkansas, Mizzou, Vanderbilt, Kentucky, Tennessee, Georgia, Alabama, Auburn, South Carolina, and Florida. So a map I found from Treadmill Horse, I believe the page is called. They are a Virginia Tech blog. They have painted Virginia Tech and NC State into the SEC picture here. Now, I think maybe this map could be considered incomplete because I think if Virginia Tech and NC State are going, I find it hard to believe that they'd be going without the likes of maybe a Clemson or a Florida State. But Kenton, what are your thoughts about NC State in the SEC?
I mean, each one presents its pros and cons, right? It's just like any other scenario where you're mixing and matching. And this one, the competition ramps up. This is what I like. This is what I want to see you against. I want to see us against the best of the best. That's what I want to see. But also, the competition ramps up. Like, you're in for some tough times of adjustment when you first hit this conference based upon what we have at the moment. Like, that's just the reality of what we're looking at here. And so that's one part of it. And another part of it is how do I put this? It's already a struggle to keep kids in state now.
Yeah.
Imagine what happens if we go to the SEC and we aren't good. But again, it's the double-edged sword of, but what if we go to the SEC and we are good? And now we are able to keep the best in state at a higher level to show, hey, listen, either way it goes, you're going to get a shot against the best of the best. You want to play Georgia? You want to play Bama? You want to play LSU? You can do that here. You don't have to leave the state. Mom and grandma and dad and granddad and uncles and aunties can come to your games, and you get to play against the best players in the nation. How's that sound? So each one comes with its pluses and minuses. This one, I think, is a tough, steep learning curve. You'll be drinking water out of a fire hydrant to begin with. For those of you who have ever opened a fire hydrant legally, of course I haven't. I'm a law-abiding citizen. You know how tough that is. But with that being said, there's the benefits to it as well.
Yeah, you highlighted kind of my main points here for the SEC, but in kind of touching back on the Big 12, I don't want to make my comments about preferring the Big 12 sound like I'm running from the grind here, but okay, it sounded like that a little bit. I get it.
Hey, listen, Damian Lillard should have been ran for the grind, okay? He should have been ran for the grind, brother. The grind didn't need you. But proceed.
But listen, I mean, the SEC is the SEC.
Right.
You picture NC State having a fall football schedule with Georgia, Auburn, and Alabama and Tennessee on it in the same fall. Woof. And I ain't saying pack at the end of that one because it's just woof.
Yeah.
That is no joke.
That's no wolf with an L. That's a double O wolf.
Double O wolf. That's right. But like you mentioned, Kenton, getting to the SEC, the competition ramps up. And there is a double-edged sword in the conversation of recruiting because, yes, I think if you get to the SEC and you struggle, it becomes a lot harder to try and build that fence around the state to keep that in-state talent from getting poached. And then the other side of that sword is that you can pitch this idea that, hey, you want to play in the SEC, buddy, we're right here. You can play against the Tennessees and the LSUs and the Arkansas. You can do that right here in Raleigh. And so, I mean, that's definitely an attractive recruiting tool that'll be in the tool bag, hypothetically, if we are in the SEC. But it's hard not to look at this and say, I think we'd be starting behind the 8 ball in nearly every sport because that's just how dominant the SEC is. But yeah, over time, if NC State is able to get the ball rolling in the SEC, think about how much fun it would be to be super competitive in a conference like this one. We've heard forever that it means more in the SEC, and to get in to break through the door and then be somebody in the SEC for NC State, what a life that would be.
I will say this: there are certain sports that this would be could potentially advantageous. I'm sorry to tell people this, and I know a lot of people are going to hate this take. SEC basketball is not that good. It is not that good at all. NC State would have a chance to come in right away and make themselves something decent, get themselves to be good here, because there are teams in the SEC that build their entire roster through the transfer portal, and every year they're one of the best teams in the SEC. So, yeah, there's that. There's that. But in all seriousness, you're right. There is going to be a no longer the big dog on the block thing, but I'd welcome it. I think that most of these players will welcome it. I think that most of our players have the competitive temperament for that. And you know what? If you don't have the competitive temperament to go against the best, I don't think you need to be here. And that's just that.
For sure. So to close this thing out, we're going to do the same thing. Kenton, pick an SEC school you think it'd be most interesting to become a rival with.
I want to say I think Mississippi State. Mississippi State is there's like a mutual respect type thing, but it's like we both have very set identities that are like, we are who we are, you are who you are. Let's see who's better at being who we are. Mississippi State football, known for being extremely physical. Their baseball team got the national championship that many NC State fans feel like should have been ours. I'd like to see that. I'd like to see that a lot. They're known as the country kids in their neck of the woods and all that, even though, let's just be honest, if you look around SEC country, all of you, each and every one of you are the country kids, but that's another story for another time, except maybe Vanderbilt, haha, nerds. But anyway, yeah, I think that'd be a good rivalry.
I'm still not over dropping that game at Mississippi State. I guess 2 years ago now. I still think we had everything we could have needed to win that game, but couldn't get the job done. My team that I think would be most interesting to become a rival with the SEC is Tennessee. And I know in saying this, we do have Tennessee. I believe it's on the 2024 schedule. You can pencil me into being there in Charlotte because that's going to be one heck of a time. But Tennessee, I think NC State fans should realize that Tennessee, their fan base is very similar to ours. It's just like exponentially bigger. They, on Twitter, they have the same kind of style, I guess you could say, without incriminating us, as NC State fans.
I lived
in Tennessee.
They're very passionate folks.
I lived close to Knoxville for 2 years, and so I kind of got to interact with Tennessee fans for a bit. They're very, very similar to NC State fans. And so I think creating, I guess, maybe a friendly rivalry, maybe even unfriendly, matching with Tennessee there would be so much fun. So much fun. And like I mentioned and talking about the Big 12, you still keep that regional, rivalry there because Tennessee's just over the mountains. I think that would be so much fun to see Tennessee year in and year out. But Ken, any final words here before we sign off?
Just one more thing about the Big Ten situation and the AAU accreditation, right? I'm reading this directly from their Wikipedia page here. AAU membership is by invitation only, which requires an affirmative vote of 3/4 of current members, yada, yada. Invitations are considered periodically, yada, yada, based on the assessment of the quality of the university and the graduate programs. So, long story short, that combined with the fact that the annual dues are only $139,500 per university, I don't think that that's a bar too high for NC State to clear. We're already a Research One institute. I'm sure we have $140,000 extra laying around. If not, I'm sure that we could find it. I'm very certain of that. So, I mean, I wouldn't rule the Big Ten out either. But with that being said, realistically, again, I don't think we have we could find 140,000. It's the 120 million that is the problem here. I think that's the big one that's like, oh, what are we doing? What's going on here?
So, yeah, I mean, there's a whole lot to consider. Like I mentioned before, it's still crazy to even conceptualize NC State in another conference than the ACC because in some aspects, we almost feel like a founder of the ACC because we've been here for so long. But I don't know. We're going to see how effective maybe this Band-Aid is that was applied on Tuesday afternoon at the ACC meetings. Maybe it falls off. Maybe we need another Band-Aid. I don't know. We're going to have to kind of wait around and find out. But for Ken Gibbs and myself, that's going to do it for us here on Wednesday. As always, thank you for tuning in and giving us a listen. Toss us that like on this video. Throw us some comments about your thoughts on the hypotheticals about NC State moving conferences. Let us know what you think. I've already seen a bunch of thoughts flying around on Twitter about where fans think we should go, what they think of where we should go. There's a lot of discussion to be had. So, and as always, mash that subscribe button. Tell a friend to tell a friend. We're closing up on 300 subscribers. We're hoping to go much higher than that, but one step at a time. So, as always, thank you for giving us a listen, and go Pack.
Go Pack.
You are Locked On Wolfpack, your daily podcast on the NC State Wolfpack, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.